shortly.
Good morning.
Order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Transport. David Duguid.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Can I take this opportunity before I answer the question to add my support and send best wishes to His Majesty the King for a swift and full recovery, and I look forward to seeing him out and about again with his public-facing duties. Mr. Speaker, it's a challenging time for seafarers, and their welfare is central to our concerns regarding the Red Sea crisis. Their bravery has ensured the continued supply of vital goods to the UK. We've engaged with organisations representing seafarers, working closely with the International Maritime Organisation. I've met with the Secretary-General, their new Secretary-General, on 2 occasions this year. We won't hesitate to take action to protect innocent lives, preserve freedom of navigation. In response to the Red Sea crisis, the RAF have engaged in 3 waves of proportionate and targeted strikes against Houthi military targets with the United States and other allies, and my department continues to work closely with industry to provide the best possible advice and support.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself and the people of Banff and Buchan with his remarks and wishing His Majesty the fullest of recoveries. And can I thank him for his answer, and can he set out in more detail precisely what engagement the government has had with British companies across the UK on not just the attacks in the Red Sea, but the threats of attacks in the Red Sea?
I can. I'm pleased to be able to tell my honourable friend we've been engaging regularly with shipping companies to make sure they're given as much advice and support as possible so that they can take informed commercial decisions about vessel movements based on the full consideration of recent events. We provide security advisory notices, we convene meetings with the sector at both official and ministerial level, and I've met with sector leaders to discuss these critical developments as well.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister very much for that very positive response. It's clear that the steps that the government is taking and the Minister is taking are positive and the ones that should be, but to broadly address the issue, what steps have been taken to ensure that individual seafaring companies, those who have responsibility for their crews, have access to up-to-date advice and even go as far as to say protective measures to enable them to keep the routes open? In other words, positive, maybe protective staff on boats or helicopters or planes overhead. Thank you.
So I thank the honourable gentleman very much for his question, and he's right to put the safety of ships and the seafarers at the centre of this, as we and the IMO do. We work very closely with the sector to make sure they've got the best information possible, both at a policy level, but also in the region. And in fact, we're taking further steps to make sure that we have the best possible advice available on the ground so that individual captains, as well as the companies, can make the best possible decisions, both commercially, but also, importantly, for the safety of their crew.
Damien Moore.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Network North will see a further £19.8 billion of investment in the north of England following the redirection of funding from HS2. This is in addition to what has already been committed through the £3.5 billion to northern city regions from the first round of the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlements, development of Northern Powerhouse Rail, which will transform rail connectivity between the north of England's key economic centres, and £11 billion for the Transpennine route upgrade.
Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the government's commitment to level up through Network North, will my honourable friend commit to a meeting with me and other key stakeholders to discuss the reinstatement of the Burscough Curves rail link, which would connect Southport to Preston and the wider north of England, fulfilling our economic potential and helping us welcome another 1 million visitors a year into Southport?
Meeting John, look at Coppell Station. Come on.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm always happy to meet with my honourable friend, and I pay tribute to him for his doughty campaigning for the reopening of the Burscough Curves. It's, of course, for local transport authorities to consider whether these projects are the best way to meet local transport needs, and if so, whether they wish to develop these schemes from the significant new transport budgets which the government will shortly allocate to them from HS2 savings.
Shannon Minister Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister made the decision to scrap HS2, his department said the plan would, and I quote, lead to increased capacity on the West Coast main line. But But, Minister, that's not correct, is it? I have a leaked document from his own officials that proves it. In it, they admit that this decision will mean fewer seats than today, with Glasgow and Manchester badly hit. And because HS2 trains can't tilt, they will be even slower than current trains. Doesn't he owe it to the North to finally admit that? And does he accept he will be the high-speed rail minister who left behind slower trains and fewer seats?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously we don't comment on documents that may or may not have been leaked. What I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, is that the HS2 train design was always to have a capacity for 500 seats. If those trains are doubled up to 400 metres, then of course that's 1,000 seats. The Network North document committed £500 million to look at capacity and how further capacity can be unlocked. But let's be quite clear. The 140 miles of HS2, which is being built to Birmingham, will reduce the journey times to Birmingham. We'll also see the journey times reduced up to Manchester by another 27 minutes and 26 minutes to Liverpool. And as far as the tilting is concerned, as the Department made it clear to the Public Accounts Committee, we are looking at where those speeds can still be achieved on the West Coast Main Line without the need to tilt.
Stephanie Peacock.
Question number 3.
Minister.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer this question along with questions numbers 9 and 16. The Department for Transport issues guidance to licensing authorities in England to help them regulate the sector. This includes the statutory taxi and private hire vehicle standards and the best practice guidance updated in November 2023. And last year, the government enacted legislation requiring licensing authorities in England to use a national database to share information to prevent drivers who lose their licence from applying elsewhere without other authorities knowing about previous wrongdoing.
Stephanie Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Local taxi drivers in Barnsley are having their prices undermined by cross-border taxi drivers who do not have to abide by the same regulatory measures they do. Local councils have no jurisdiction over out-of-borough hires, and concerns have been raised about differences in training and safety precautions required. The Labour Party have committed to action. When will the government do the same?
Well, there is already a database and there is already a duty on local authorities to share, and in those particular circumstances that she identifies, licences can be taken away in the circumstances she suggested.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. But taxis, private hire vehicles, are a very personal service, and it's really important for the customers that both the vehicles and the drivers have proper safety checks. And if things go wrong, that the customer can go to the local authority, the licensing authority, and make their complaints. The problem is when that authority is 100 miles away in Wolverhampton, the system simply doesn't work. So when is the Minister going to legislate to make sure that, that journeys can only be on a licensed vehicle when they either take place or finish in the area where the licensed authority is?
Well, with the greatest respect to the honourable gentleman, the fact is that we have already brought in changes to the rules such that individual local authorities can take action against another individual person who operates in that other authority. And that is something which I think he should be welcoming.
Daniel Zach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Minister knows, and we've heard from colleagues, the cross-border issue remains a real issue right across the country. And we now have the additional problem of the potentially changed relationship between operators and drivers, which is highlighted by some of the press campaigns about the possible imposition of VAT on private hire journeys. So doesn't this all show that the Department should have modernised taxi and private hire legislation ages ago, rather than wait for companies like Uber to drive in coach and horses through regulations that were frankly written in the time of coach and horses?
Yeah. Well, I don't call regulations written in 2020 and updated in 2023 as a coach and horses time, and he should possibly check his history. The second bit is in relation to the Uber case that he rightly identifies. Clearly, that is a court case that the government has to address and has then consult upon following thereafter.
Secretary of State Louise Hay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the Secretary of State's best wishes to His Majesty the King? Mr. Speaker, during my time in this House, I've worked alongside victims and survivors of the Rotherham child sexual exploitation scandal. And following that scandal, Rotherham Council set very high standards for its taxi drivers, including CCTV in its cabs and requiring MVQ level 3 on child safeguarding. But those standards are being undercut by the government's deregulation of taxi standards, and nothing that the Minister has set out this morning has stopped that. Doesn't he agree that the position is putting women and girls' safety at risk, and isn't it time for robust legislation and national minimum standards to protect them?
Well, with respect, on the 27th of April, Mr Speaker, a new law came into force which requires licensing authorities in England to use a database to record refusals, suspensions and revocations made on safeguarding or road safety grounds. The new requirements mean that individuals who are not fit and proper to hold a taxi or private hire vehicle licence will not be able to apply for a licence with other authorities without that authority being aware of past safety concern. This change will help protect passengers, including women and girls, as well as the reputation of the majority of drivers from those who are unfit to hold office.
Right, let us move on to Rachel Hopkins.
Number 4, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I will answer this question along with question number 8. The Government is providing the largest public investment in buses for a generation, providing more than £4.5 billion worth of services in England, outside London since 2020, as we rebuild post-COVID.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituents are deeply concerned about the proposed cuts to the 78, 79 and 200 bus routes linking villages and towns in Bedfordshire. And this is in the context of the government's own latest bus statistics showing that in the last decade, the bus sector in England outside London has lost 15,000 workers, and with around 600 million fewer annual bus passenger journeys. The government's bus strategy published in 2020 is not taking effect to reverse this decline. So will the government commit to reversing the ideological ban on municipal bus companies and ensure that all local authorities get sufficient funding to deliver the bus services our communities need?
Well, I think the Honourable Lady seems to have forgotten that there was a COVID pandemic, because the number of local bus passenger journeys in England increased by 500 million, that's 19%. In the financial year ending March 2023. Clearly, her local authority has had an extra BSIP plus funding of £19 million, and I would urge her bus operators to sign up to the £2 bus fare that we have found across the country is transformational in raising bus numbers.
Sir Jake Barry.
Speaker, of the £3.722 million long-term bus service improvement plan government cash given to Blackburn with Darwen Council, would the Minister be as surprised as me to know that of that £3.7 million, only £180,000 is being spent in the town of Darwen, less than 5% of the entire budget? It's all very well for the Minister to give this money to these councils, like Blackburn with Darwen. Will he ensure that it is spent fairly amongst the populations they represent?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very good point. This is money that the government gives to ensure that communities across a particular constituency do receive support. It shouldn't be solely focused on one particular area. I will take up the particular point. I will also write to the local authority myself.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, bus mileage in London has dropped by just 5% since 2010, yet astonishingly has fallen by more than 30% in the North East, as indeed the Minister will know. Something that our Labour candidate for North East Mayor, Kim McGuinness, is keen to fix as a priority if elected in May. But can I ask the Minister, isn't it above time to let local communities have power and control of their own local bus services?
Minister.
Well, clearly the news that we are having a regional mayor for the North East is good news. I wouldn't think she will be celebrating the fact that she has a disastrous PCC as her candidate, and the previous Labour mayor is now running as an independent against the Labour Party. However, it is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best funded devolution deal in the country. Not my words, that's the Labour mayor's words. And I genuinely believe that we are building back better post-COVID with enhanced bus company usage in circumstances where the £2 bus fare is making a huge difference.
Right, let us go to Shadow Minister Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Recent statistics show that the B network is already making a daily difference for bus passengers around Greater Manchester, with an 8% rise in patronage in the first month of franchising alone, and more bus services running on time than before. Liverpool and West Yorkshire are now following in Greater Manchester's footsteps and exploring their own franchising plans to revolutionise local transport for thousands of residents. So does the Minister agree with Labour's plan to give every local authority, not just Metro mayors, the same freedom to take back control of their own bus services? And if not, what does he say to the millions of people whose bus routes have been so badly cut back under this tired Tory government? Doesn't it prove that whilst the Conservatives dither, Labour delivers?
So, with respect, the factual matter is that the number of bus journeys in England has increased by £500 million to 3.4 billion in the financial year ending March 2023. That is done, though, because of massive government funding that has effectively doubled since 2009. And this is the circumstances where he lauds a particular thing that is funded by this government. And it is unquestionably the case that we have allowed certain local authorities and certain mayors to do franchising. That is something that we brought in. However, there has to be a way of paying for it. And as was demonstrated on a repeat basis, is that when Labour organisations are challenged on this, they struggle to find out how they're going to do the funding, because, quite simply, they don't have a plan.
Teresa Villiers.
Question number 5, Mr Speaker, sir.
Mr Speaker, in England, this is primarily a matter for local authorities. 20-mile-an-hour limits work in the right places, like outside schools, and with the right consultation with the public. They don't work as blanket measures. We don't support them being set indiscriminately on all roads without due regard to the safety case and with local support.
20-mile-an-hour limits can work for quite narrow residential side roads where there's local consent, but London's Labour mayor and boroughs are increasingly inflicting them on wide roads, on main roads where they're not justified. And now Barnet Council wants a big 20 mph zone in Whetstone without adequate consultation. So will he intervene to make sure that 20 mph limits are not introduced in inappropriate circumstances and they're only introduced where they have strong local support?
Well, I agree entirely with my right honourable friend. The imposition of blanket 20-mile-an-hour zones without local support, which is what Labour's done across Wales and in London, is bad for drivers, but it also risks reducing the specific protection to vulnerable road users, for example, near schools. As our plan for drivers sets out, we're going to put in place stronger guidance to make sure we restrict blanket 20-mile-an-hour zones, and will consider further action against councils who don't comply with the guidance.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On the one hand, the Secretary of State acknowledges the ability of local authorities to deliver their own local transport strategies, such as low traffic neighbourhoods and 20 mph zones where they fit. But on the other hand, his plan for drivers weaponises such policies. So will the Secretary of State stop weaponising these things, consider those who are not in vehicles, who are using our roads, who seek the safety measures from their local authorities, and understand that all of us are road users, whether or not we're in a vehicle?
Secretary of State.
I think that question, Mr Speaker, had the disadvantage of having been written before she listened to my answer. I was very clear in my answer that I said I support 20-mile-an-hour zones in areas where they make sense. For example, outside a school, it makes perfect sense. What doesn't make sense is blanket policies that bear no relationship to the circumstances. That's what Labour's done in Wales, implementing blanket policies that are very unpopular, don't carry public support, and actually damage the acceptance of 20-mile-an-hour zones in places where they do make sense. Well, the honourable gentleman says from a sedentary position, conspiracy. My constituency is next door to Wales, Mr Speaker, and I can tell you it's not a conspiracy. It's incredibly unpopular, 20-mile-an-hour zones across Wales. It's a blanket policy, it makes no sense, and it's not supported by the public.
Dr Alan White.
Here. Number 6, Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. My department has worked closely with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero in developing the biomass strategy published last year and on our forthcoming low-carbon fuel strategy so that harder to decarbonise sectors, including aviation, should be priority uses for biomass. We're continuing to work across governments and with industry experts to ensure policies which increase the supply of sustainable aviation fuels deliver on our climate change commitments.
Dr. Alan Whiter.
I'm grateful for that answer from the Minister, but the Minister will be aware that the SAF mandate is coming in force in 2025, but meanwhile the Government has not yet responded to consultations on how the mandate will work, and there's no real-world fuel sourcing analysis or plan in place that takes account of the changing nature of municipal waste arising or the already allocated uses of municipal and agricultural feedstock for other purposes than the production of SAF. So what steps is the Minister taking to develop a realistic plan for feedstock availability and use?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I welcome the question from the honourable member. We have, as I said in my first answer, we are publishing the low-carbon fuel strategy shortly, which will set out the different sources of low-carbon fuels. We will be publishing our response to the SAF mandate by spring. There's a lot of detailed analysis and work going on there about different sources of fuels. We engage, we'll also be publishing the revenue certainty mechanism to make sure that we have a UK SAF industry. We engage regularly with the industry on this, and I can tell you that they are very confident and supportive of the government's policies. I have to say we do have a detailed plan. I just want to commiserate with the honourable member. I'm sure as Energy Minister he did have a plan, but the opposition's plan seems to have been U-turned today.
Andrew Weston.
Question 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2010, regulated fares across Great Britain have decreased by around 7% compared to the retail price index. The government continues to intervene to keep fares affordable and encourage travel by capping increases below inflation and delivering initiatives such as the second Great British Rail Sale. We have to strike a balance between encouraging passengers to use our rail network and supporting the rail industry to get back on a good financial footing as it continues to deal with a revenue shortfall following the pandemic.
Andrew Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For a period last year, Urmston train station in my constituency was in the list of the 10 worst performing train stations for service reliability in the country. Given the level of service experienced by my constituents utilising Urmston and other stations on that line, why are they set to face an inflation-busting fare increase in March?
Good question. Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if we take the current year's fares as an example, we delivered the biggest government intervention on rail fares since privatisation by capping fares at 5.9%, which is 6.4 percentage points below where the July RPI would have been. It's all about striking a balance, and I believe that balance is a fair one. In the last 3 years, £45.9 billion has been contributed from the UK taxpayer to keep the railways going. The figure of 4.9% again is below inflation for this year. It can't be that bad because Labour Wales have done exactly the same thing, which is better than Scotland, where the SNP have put fares up by 8.7%.
Sir Edward Lee.
If later this morning you were to get a train from Market Rasen to London, not only would you be hit by a hefty rail fare, which we all know about, but worse, it would take you over 3 hours with a new train, 2 changes. So my honourable friend has promised me and my honourable friend for Cleethorpes again and again that he's going to give us our through train to London. Now, I understand that he's now approved it, so he can confirm that today, but it's held up on the desk of the Chief Secretary Treasury. We don't want some bean counter in the Treasury stopping our train.
I fear a career-limiting response. The honourable member's campaign is a strong one, and he's absolutely right. It's something that has the support from this team, and I'm sure it will have the support across government. It is currently being looked at, and I hope to be able to give him and his other colleagues good news in time to come.
SNP spokesperson Owen Thompson.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. I apologise for the disruption to normal service as a member for Paisley and Renfrewshire North on committee business, so you'll have to put up with a spokesperson replacement service this morning. Mr. Speaker, last October, peak fares were scrapped across Scotland's railways for a period of 6 months, now extended to 9 months until the end of June, and as a result, ScotRail services are 4% busier since the pilot, and demand shifting across the service day. Meanwhile, DFT-owned LNER have pushed prices for thousands of tickets up in the name of simplification, in some cases costing passengers to and from Scotland hundreds of pounds extra. Will the Minister look to Scotland's lessons from scrapping peak fares and apply this policy across the Anglo-Scottish services?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm delighted to talk about matters which are being scrapped, because perhaps we can shift towards rail freight, because the SNP budget has just been set. And there's always been a mode shift revenue support given to rail freight to move freight from road to rail. The Scottish SNP government have just announced they are axing that subsidy. And not only that, for the year to come, cross-border, where there was a share between Scotland and the rest of Great Britain, that has been scrapped as well. Now, we will stand by that rail freight subsidy, so we will fund the Scottish element. But what are the Scottish Government doing when they talk about decarbonisation on the one part and then are shifting more freight onto the road because they refuse to support the rail freight? It's an absolute shocker, Mr Speaker. That, along with an 8.7% increase in fares and an £80 million cut to ScotRail, means that the honourable member is in no place to lecture anyone when it comes to rail.
John Randall.
Question 10, sir.
Mr Speaker, with your permission, I would like to answer this question along with question number 15. As part of the Network North plan, the Government is providing a record funding increase of £8.3 billion for local highway maintenance in England over the next decade to enable local highway authorities to resurface roads up and down the country. Over that period, Nottinghamshire will be getting £138.44 million of additional funding over and above what it would have received. And in the current financial year, most highways authorities in England will get 30% more funding than in the previous year.
Right. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that answer, and I'm grateful for the billions that have been redirected to the Midlands for road repairs from HS2. And Conservative-controlled Nottinghamshire County Council, in difficult financial circumstances, is endeavouring to spend millions beyond its regular highways budget on road repairs. So can I just impress upon the Minister that this remains one of the perhaps the top issue in my inbox of issues that are raised with me, and will he join me perhaps and impress upon him, particularly when he's in his conversations with the Treasury, and if he can join me in my campaign to carry on fixing Gedling's roads.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, but both for raising the issue, but also to pointing out how effective Nottinghamshire County Council is in spending the £2.3 million they're getting this year, and that they'll be getting next year. It is revolutionary long-term funding. It's interesting, though, Mr Speaker, it's because we've got a plan, not just for delivering better roads, but we've also got a plan, Mr Speaker, for paying for it. Having a plan to deliver and to pay for things is important, Mr Speaker, as I think the Labour Party's finding out today. No plan and no way to pay for it.
Durham Henry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And may I associate myself with the remarks from the Secretary of State in wishing His Majesty the King a speedy recovery. Potholes in Broxtowe are incredibly bad and are an issue that comes up all the time with my constituents. The ongoing situation is compounded by the multiple recent flooding events in Nottinghamshire that have caused 5 times more damage to our roads than in other years. My office gets calls and emails constantly about this plight, from Beeston, Stapleford, Streley, Nuttall and Kimberley, to name a few of the areas I'm contacted about. This week, I met with my honourable friend for Mansfield, the leader of Nottinghamshire County Council, to raise this issue. What more is the government doing to work with local councils and tackle potholes in Broxtowe?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I should say also that our honourable friend, the member for Mansfield, who leads Nottinghamshire County Council, raised that specific issue of flood damaged roads with me as well, and we're looking to see what we can do. I'm glad he raises the importance of funding to improve local roads. It's a big decision that we made. I think it's an important sense of priorities to improve the road network over time and allow local authorities to spend that money. We're also making sure that there are reporting requirements, so highways authorities have to set out for the people to whom they're accountable what they're spending the money on.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The situation regarding potholes is a metaphor for what the government has been doing with public investment over the last 14 years. The roads have got worse and worse. The AA described October as the worst month for pothole breakdowns on our roads. If the government was really concerned about this issue, it wouldn't have starved local authorities of the resources to actually deal with this problem in the first place. Isn't that correct?
No, I don't agree with the honourable gentleman at all. We've given local authorities, I think, over £5 billion of funding for local road maintenance. The £8.3 billion in the Network North plan is over and above that. And I would have thought he would have welcomed the fact that when we announced the money for local road maintenance, I made the specific decision to make sure that in London, 95% of that extra funding went to London local councils rather than TfL, so that it gets spent on fixing the roads rather than getting wasted by the Mayor of London.
Shadow Minister Bill Esterson.
Well, the Secretary of State seems to have forgotten the extensive cuts to the road repair budget that his government has presided over. Let's take Northamptonshire, where the government cut £16 million from highways maintenance since 2020 alone. That's leaving 330,000 potholes unfilled. The Minister knows the Network North announcement will only give Northamptonshire £2.5 million of that £16 million back over the next 2 years. And as for Wellingborough, last time Peter Bone mentioned road repairs is in 2015. So after 14 years of neglect by the Conservative government and by their former Conservative MP, isn't the best advice for people in Wellingborough who want action on potholes to vote for Labour's Jen Kitchen next Thursday?
Well, it won't surprise the honourable gentleman, I don't agree with him at all. Before the Network North announcement, the government was already investing over £5.5 billion of capital funding for highways maintenance between 2021 and 24-25. And at the budget last year, the Chancellor found an extra £200 million for all eligible highways authorities. The £8.3 billion was on top of that. And I would urge local voters in Wellingborough to vote for our fantastic candidate, Helen Harrison, who will make a fantastic Member of Parliament to serve on this side of the House.
Barry Sherman.
Number 11, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, in January 2022, the government updated the Highway Code to improve road safety for people walking, cycling and riding. Changes aim to make a positive shift in road user behaviour by making road users aware of their responsibility to use roads safely and then to reduce the dangers they most pose to others. And obviously the government's flagship multi-million-pound road safety campaign, THINK, also plays a crucial part in reducing the number of people killed or seriously injured on our roads.
Barry Sherman.
Mr Speaker, is the Minister and the rest of his team aware that our country was known to be one of the safest places for in the world in terms of road safety? And now, after 14 years of neglect, with no targets, a hatred of targets, with little enforcement, we are now a very dangerous place to be a vulnerable road user. When is this government going to wake up and start doing something about that?
With no disrespect to the honourable gentleman, who I like as a person, he is simply wrong. That in the last year, ending June 2023, there was a decline of 9% in respect to fatalities compared to the year ending June 2022. And look at these specific measures. We have toughened up the driving test. We have made the highway code more robust. We've introduced tougher criminal sentences. These are the actions of a government listening and taking action.
John Penrose.
Question 12, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Office for Rail and Road has been working with Network Rail and the Department for Transport to identify unused access rights. This work will support the release of underutilised capacity on the rail network, which in turn may be used by potential operators in the development of open access proposals.
John Penrose.
Well, Mr Speaker, it's great to hear there's work underway. I noticed my honourable friend didn't say how far it had got. And he will understand, I know he understands, this is a huge opportunity to improve our over-subsidised post-pandemic railways so passengers get a better deal. But if we don't move faster, it's going to slip through our fingers. The only people who are happy with the status quo are middle-aged men who want to carry on playing with trains at taxpayers' expense, and the Labour Party want to run it for the benefit of rail unions rather than passengers. Please, can we get on with this a lot faster?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I thought he was referring to me with that middle-aged man point, but I can assure my honourable friend that we are working at pace. So since we met in November with the team, that included him, to see what further we could do, we've written to operators to clarify that unused access rights should be released. With regard to DFT operators, we have hundreds of unused access rights which we have identified for release. And we also talked about speeding up the entire decision-making process. the ORR and Network Rail now have a draft service level agreement which will do just that. I will write to him with more detail, but a lot has happened in the last month.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 13, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, transport in London is devolved to the Mayor of London, and since 2020 the government has given TfL £6.6 billion of funding to support rail transport services, and it's the responsibility of the Greater London Authority to hold the Mayor and Transport for London to account. The Department is in regular contact with TfL and monitors their finances in accordance with the terms of our funding settlement letters.
Bob Black.
I thank my right honourable friend for that answer. Clearly, the £6.6 billion to subsidise TfL came with strings attached, including raising fares in line with the rest of England. No sooner did the last instalment of the money arrive, but the Mayor managed to find £30 million to pay off the RMT, who threatened strike action, which has stored up problems for the next negotiations. He then found £120 million so he doesn't raise fares in line with England. And indeed, he's now come up with his crazy policy of reduced fares on Fridays, but he didn't talk to anyone about introducing it first. So can my right honourable friend have a meeting with the Labour Mayor of London and actually make sure that the money that is being used, provided by the department, is actually used for the benefit of Londoners?
Well, I think my honourable friend's right to say that it's important that the money is used for the benefit of Londoners. We provided very significant support, as I've set out, and it's not stopped him, of course, from putting up taxes on the poorest motorists with the extension of his ULEZ scheme to outer London. I think the best way, rather than having a meeting with him, I think the best way, Mr Speaker, to hold the Mayor of London to account is for voters in London to vote for Susan Hall and kick him out.
Julian Sturdy.
Number 14, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Because of the Prime Minister's decision, Network North will see a £19.8 billion extra transport investment in the north of England, including a brand new £2.5 billion fund to transform local transport in 14 rural counties, smaller cities and towns in every part of the north outside the big city regions. This is in addition to what has already been committed through the Integrated Rail Plan and the £11 billion Transpennine route upgrade.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for visiting my constituency back in January, and following that visit he's aware of the important economic impact that the A64 plays for York and North Yorkshire. But can I stress to him again how important the upgrading is to safety issues on the road. A few days following his visit, the road was closed again due to a serious accident, and that sadly followed another fatal accident in December on the road. This is becoming an ever-increasing occurrence. So can I ask, when he's looking at the upgrading of the A64 going forward, that the safety impact plays an important role in that?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and it was a pleasure to visit his constituency and meet with himself and other parliamentary colleagues who were so passionately concerned about improvement and the safety issues on the A64. I take the point he raises very, very much on board. I know that National Highways are developing options to address the concerns that he and local people and businesses have identified with the road. We will look at those very, very closely, and I welcome the fact that he continues to champion this important point.
Steve Tuck.
Question 17, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This government is helping low-income motorists by keeping down the cost of motoring. There's been no increase in the male fuel duty since January 2011, 13 years ago, and furthermore, recognising the fuel price volatility after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, we cut 5 pence off fuel duty in March 2022. This has been extended for another year in March 2023 till later this year. This cut, along with the inflation freeze, has saved the average car driver around £100 this year.
Steve Tuck.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his answer. Months after the Mayor of London's ULEZ expansion came into effect, some of Uxbridge and South Wessex most hard-working and least well-off residents continue to be penalised by it. As part of the government's work to help motorists, will he commit to continuing to work with myself and colleagues from across outer London to ensure that we're doing all we can to lessen the financial burden on all motorists?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for raising that point. I'm very sorry to hear about the burden that the Mayor of London has forced on the poorest motorists in London, particularly when we hear that his scrappage scheme is underfunded and slow to process payments. Now, this is a direct consequence of a Labour mayor who didn't keep his word to Londoners. And I'm afraid the only remedy for Londoners is to vote him out and vote in Susan Hall in May.
We need to incentivise people from all incomes to participate in the green transition. However, electric vehicles are totally out of reach for most car owners, and especially those on low incomes. And additionally, people who rely on public charging points are still paying a lot more than those who can charge from home. Will the government close this gap to ensure that everybody is getting a fair deal, including those on low incomes, to make sure that we are getting to net zero, and those on low incomes also want to help the country to get to net zero?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for that question. It is my responsibility to help roll out electric vehicles. We clearly introduced the zero-emission vehicle mandate to ensure that 22% of electric vehicle sales are this year, vehicle sales this year are zero emission. And I should say, throughout the life cycle of an electric vehicle, actually they are cheaper than petrol or diesel cars to drive. And this government has given £2 billion of support to owners of electric vehicles and to charge point companies to help smooth that introduction. The specific question she raises is one about VAT, and that is a matter for the Treasury.
Number 18, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Greater Anglia currently operate an hourly direct rail service between Norwich and Cambridge using their new rolling stock with a journey time of around 80 minutes. It's also possible to travel between Norwich and Cambridge at other times by changing trains at Ely Station. When the Ely Area Capacity Enhancement Scheme is delivered, it could create improved regional journeys for passengers across East Anglia.
That answer. Costs are rising for growing a business in Cambridge, and yet Norwich, a finer city, is just down the road and, more importantly, just down the railway. We need a greater frequency of trains and faster trains to make the Norwich-Cambridge Tech Corridor a greater reality. It's being held back by the delays in getting the Ely Junction fixed. How soon will that be sorted out by the department?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and can I welcome my honourable friend's campaign for the Ely Junction Capacity Enhancement Scheme. It is one of the schemes referenced in the Prime Minister's Network North plan. Network Rail have developed the scheme to outline business case stage, and next steps will involve further investment case development and delivery planning. I'm keen to see it delivered, Mr. Speaker, because it delivers for rail freight.
We come to topicals tomorrow.
Number 1, sir.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. This week, the government showed once again we're on the side of Britain's drivers. New measures from our plan for drivers will make it simpler to charge electric cars, with schools and colleges receiving grants to boost charging and the first payments from our £381 million levy fund released. We're also consulting on speeding up charge point installation. Mr. Speaker, we've got a plan to decarbonise transport that's working. The party opposite's in disarray. The Labour Party today, the leader of the Labour Party, will ditch Labour's flagship spending promise, despite, Mr. Speaker, only committing to it on Tuesday. The Honourable Lady must feel uncomfortable, having said weeks ago it was very important. Not the first time she's been in this position. She said a month ago the cancelling HS Phase 2 would make transport worse. The very same day, the leader of the Labour Party overruled her and agreed with the Prime Minister's plan. Labour's got no plan, no direction, no clue.
Order! Just a second, Secretary of State. You know you've no responsibility for the opposition. I'm sure you won't want to take that as part of your portfolio. I do need to get through topicals, Tim Long.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear about the Secretary of State's plans, but does he have a plan to deal with some of the apparent traffic jams in responding to consultations and private member legislation in his department? In 2020, the consultation on pavement parking closed, causing huge problems for guide dogs and wheelchairs and everybody else. When are we going to have a response to that? And my honourable friend for East Yorkshire's Parking Code of Practice Act from 2019, when are we going to see the plans to cut down on cowboy parking enforcement companies? When's that traffic jam going to be eased?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising these issues. On the issue about pavement parking, I can say that we'll be coming out with the response to that very shortly. I can't give him a specific date on that. On the issue about roadworks generally, we're going to consult on plans to improve the measures that stop utility companies causing roadworks to overrun, putting more pressure on them to ensure that our roads can keep moving to support drivers.
So, Secretary of State Louise Haig.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
What does the Secretary of State think it says about the performance standards in the contracts he signed with failing operators that senior executives at Avanti, whose cancellations now run at 17%, could boast about the free money that's too good to be true from the taxpayer?
Two things, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Avanti haven't got any money under the performance regime because they haven't delivered appropriate enough quality, demonstrating, Mr. Speaker, we only pay for good performance. On the specific issue she raises, I and the Rail Minister have raised that with Avanti. Senior executives have at first have agreed with us that those comments were appalling, and they are taking steps to deal with that issue within the company.
Right. Louise Haig again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Look, they were disgraceful from Avanti, but the problem goes to the contracts that he is signing with such failing operators. Last year, Govia Thameslink failed on every single performance measure at their stations, but rather than enforcing the standards in the contract and demanding better, he lowered them so that Govia could still potentially receive their bonus and performance fee at potential cost of millions to the taxpayer. Isn't this the perfect symbol of the Conservatives' broken rail network, failure rewarded and passengers and the taxpayers paying the price?
No, it absolutely isn't, Mr. Speaker. She referred to Avanti there. I gave her the answer to the question. I gave her the answer to the question on Avanti, and then she just repeated something that simply wasn't the case. Under the service quality regime that Avanti operates under, they haven't received any. They haven't received any payments under that regime because they haven't been hitting the quality targets. They haven't been hit. Well, if you listen to my answer, they haven't hit the quality target. So that's exactly the performance working.
Rudy Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cumbria Coastal Railway is vitally important for the energy coast for both passengers and freight. I really welcome the extra funding and services that the Network North will bring. Could the Rail Minister update me on the latest progress?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be delighted to update my honourable friend. She'll know that the upgrade of the energy coastline was one of the commitments in the Network North document. The department is now working closely with Network Rail and local stakeholders to revisit the scope of the interventions which were presented in the 2022 outline business case, and we expect this work to conclude later this year.
SNP spokesperson Owen Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, the A701 Relief Road realignment is a key regional infrastructure project with knock-ons for national benefits, not to mention the major improvements it would make within Midlothian. The so-called levelling up round 3 didn't even allow this project to bid for it, and I know that the leader of Midlothian Council, along with the leaders of all the councils in the Edinburgh South East Scotland City deal, have written to the Levelling Up Secretary to express their disappointment. Can I ask the Secretary of State if he will add his voice to theirs in calling for this critical infrastructure to be supported?
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that the primary responsibility for delivering road transport in Scotland is the responsibility of the SNP government because it's devolved. I am pleased that he's welcomed the levelling up bids that have been delivered in Scotland. That's very welcome, with this government delivering for the people of Scotland where his government's failed. On the specific issue, I will of course draw his remarks to the attention of the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fraserburgh-based Graham Adams is the UK's pre-eminent manufacturer of refrigerated trailers, who I'm told were actually involved in the design of regulations in the early days of refrigerated transport. Would the Minister meet with me and Graham Adams management and engineers to see what can be done to ensure that regulations are updated at a pace to keep up with the ongoing innovations made by this great example of British manufacturing?
Minister.
So, my honourable friend has been a fantastic champion for Fraserburgh, but also for his particular business, and I know the issue very, very well in respect of longer semi-trailers and the compliance issues in relation to the regulations there. I'd be delighted to meet with him and the company, and I want to assure the company and the wider industry that we are working to find a way forward on this particular thing, because it matters. We want to support his business.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His Majesty the King is well known and much loved in my constituency, so on behalf of my constituents can I wish him a full recovery. Does the government agree that the sustainability of transport links, air links in particular, between Scottish airports and the rest of the UK are very, very important. For example, flights in and out of Wick Airport are crucial to the economic development of the far north.
Well, I thank the honourable member for that question. Indeed, aviation is incredibly important for economic development across the entirety of the UK, including aviation links between Scotland and England. But his question was about Wick Airport, and the public service obligations of Wick Airport lie entirely within Scotland and are a matter for the Scottish Government.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Roads Minister will recall a meeting that I had with him, along with my colleagues from Grimsby and Scunthorpe, about resurfacing the A180 and removing the concrete surface. I've had many meetings with road ministers over the years who've promised this. Is he going to be the one who can deliver it?
Yeah.
Minister.
I sincerely hope so.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One SME owner in my Manchester constituency told me that if he has meetings in London, he now travels down the night before very often because he can't rely on Avanti's train service. Even if the trains aren't cancelled, we learnt recently that Avanti is Britain's least punctual train operator. So given that terrible service, does the Secretary of State now regret his premature decision to extend the contract for the West Coast Main Line?
Mr. Speaker, when the decision was taken to extend the Avanti contract, it's because their performance had improved dramatically. At that time, had got to its only induced cancellation rates of 1.5%, down from 13%. Avanti are in the process of hiring 70 drivers per year. I have spoken to Avanti about matters that were raised in the Chamber today, and also about their recent service. And Mr. Speaker, we know they need to do better. We are holding them to account to ensure that they do.
It is an appalling service.
Yeah.
One Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The proposed West London orbital network will potentially enable trains to run from Hendon to Hounslow and will take literally millions of passengers off the underground and will indeed be a boon to all people in West London. I wonder if my right honourable friend has had a look at this proposed plan and if he will give it the green light.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have had a presentation on this plan. I'm very happy to meet with my honourable friend to update him. It is a matter that I find of interest, and I would like to see matters like this brought forward, albeit, of course, we have to balance it to ensure that the taxpayer is not put to extra risk.
Jerome Mayo.
Speaker, the duelling of the A47 route at Blowfield was ready to go, fully funded, a year ago. Since then, the former Green Party parliamentary candidate has bogged it down in a series of legal challenges. As soon as that's overcome, is the department right behind this much-needed duelling scheme?
The government is utterly committed to the A47, and the court case that the honourable gentleman refers is also linked to the A57, and both those roads are something that we are absolutely passionately committed to do so. We await the judgment, which we will believe will be within the next month or so.
Mohammed Jasper.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Bedford Borough could become the home of the only universal theme park in Europe, bringing enormous prosperity and jobs to my constituency and indeed the eastern region. Given road infrastructure funding has already been allocated until 2025, will the government commit to supporting this exciting project and funding the substantial road improvements that will be necessary for this plan to go ahead?
So I'm very familiar with that scheme. I've been briefed on it myself, and I know the Chancellor has been involved in this as well. We will look very carefully at the proposals that are brought forward, and I know the government will want to do what we can to make sure that this exciting proposal comes to fruition.
Steve Tutwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister update the House on what measures are being taken to reduce the amount of litter and debris which is blighting many of our central reservations and grass verges on our major highways?
Well, my honourable friend is right to raise this point. It is absolutely vital that the great British public stop throwing litter. That would be the first and most important thing. But I can assure him that we have National Highways who are utterly committed and gave evidence to the Transport Select Committee where they described where they had literally dozens and dozens of people out every single day clearing up the litter. But it is fundamentally on the public to stop doing that.
Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Heathrow Airport last year saw a significant increase in noise complaints. Residents in my constituency are regularly woken up in the middle of the night by the roar of jet engines overhead, with well-documented impacts on their physical and mental health. So will the Secretary of State finally commit to banning night flights between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m?
Mr. Speaker, I welcome that question from the honourable member. It's very important in terms of noise to strike a balance between the negative impacts on aviation on local communities who live close to the airports, but also allowing the economic benefits of flights around the UK. We are shortly going to be publishing the results of a consultation on night flights, and the honourable member should wait for that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Vehicle parking parked on pavements continues to have a negative impact on disabled people, especially those who are blind and partially sighted like myself. It has been 4 years since the government's consultation on it, and yet still no action. The Minister said they were going to respond to that consultation soon. Soon is not good enough. When will they bring forward a plan to actually ban pavement parking?
Well, she will understand there is already provisions in place permitting action by local authorities, but in respect of the government review, we intend to publish it very shortly.
Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, has the ministerial team seen PAC's recent report on the growing number of accidents involving e-scooters? Will he look at that report? Because it not only is it's an increasing danger to all our constituents, but also the lack of police follow-up of accidents.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So e-scooters, the use of private e-scooters on public land, on roads and pavements, is illegal in the UK, and it is up to the police to enforce that illegal use. We do have legal trials of rental e-scooters around the country, 23 different trials. We've recently announced the extension of those trials, and we're using the data from that to learn more about the dangers of e-scooters or otherwise, and we'll use that data to inform policy for whatever future regulation of e-scooters there should be.
Mr. Speaker, out of 5 out of the 8 years that the London Mayor has been in office, he's frozen fares, meaning that they're 14% below the national fare increases. So I heard the Secretary of State's answer to the honourable member for Brent East, Harrow East, earlier on. I take it from his answer that he is opposed to those fare freezes and that he expects the Conservative Mayor, if elected, to put them up.
No, what I find surprising is that the London Mayor spends an awful lot of time pretending he doesn't have any money. Then he puts up taxes on hard-working motorists in outer London, and then, surprisingly, Mr. Speaker, just before an election, he finds a secret war chest enabling him to do popular things. Everyone knows if he were to win, he would end up putting up taxes again on the poorest motorists. They know that as sure as night follows day, which is why they should vote for Susan Hall.
That now brings us to Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for all those answers right along the line. In the terms of accessibility for disabled passengers, ever mindful we're in an age of equality and disabled people deserve to have the same opportunity, has consideration been given to ensuring that taxi firms have an obligation to also provide disabled vehicles in every shift pattern?
Well, it is always good to have the honourable gentleman winding up proceedings, and I will take away the particular point, have a very detailed look at what he raises, and get officials to ensure that they give me a detailed answer that I'll write to him about.
Right, that completes transport questions. Let the front benches change over. We now come to business questions. Shannon, Leader of the House, Lou.